Greetings to all our viewers tuning in to this special news bulletin today. In a world where conflict and mistrust have become the common language between nations, any message carrying the breath of peace instantly becomes the center of attention. On June 24th, former US President Donald Trump made a surprising announcement. The United States had brokered a full ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran, two nations long considered incapable of sitting at the same negotiating table. The announcement came during a press conference in The Hague on the sidelines of the NATO summit, delivered with a tone of confidence and high hopes. However, just hours later, the unspoken sounds from the Middle East roared louder than any political declaration. Missile attacks, rising tensions across diplomatic channels, and warning headlines in the international press all pointed to a stark reality. The ceasefire, if it truly exists, is hanging by the thinnest of threads. And once again, the world holds its breath, watching a confrontation between two forces long accustomed to gunfire and suspicion. Just days after the ceasefire announcement, early signs suggest that the fragile peace already shows signs of strain. Across international media, observers are voicing cautious assessments regarding the durability of the agreement. One of the more notable analyses comes from Andreas Koch, a specialist at the Middle East Research Institute at King's College London. In an interview with Business Insider, Koch emphasized that the ceasefire between Israel and Iran was not built on a stable foundation, but merely propped up by the political presence of the US and Qatar. According to him, this is a kind of peace lacking enforcement mechanisms, devoid of any legally binding commitments, and entirely dependent on the political will of two nations that have never trusted one another. Koch also warned that minor military actions, scattered missile launches from either side, and movements by affiliated armed groups could easily become the spark that brings it all crashing down. This isn't a peace agreement that deters conflict. It's a pause, one that could be shattered by a single explosion, he said. And in that pause, no one can say for sure what comes next. Because in a land where trust has never taken root, everything is only temporary. Among the potential scenarios, if the ceasefire between Iran and Israel collapses, Iran's move to blockade the Strait of Hormuz is seen as the most formidable and most dangerous deterrent, with serious implications for the global economy. This isn't the first time Hormuz has emerged as a strategic flashpoint. This narrow waterway, situated between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, measures just over 30 kilometers at its narrowest point, but it functions as the lifeblood of global energy. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through it daily. In past statements, Iranian leaders have repeatedly hinted at shutting down Hormuz if their national interests are threatened. Legally, Tehran has no unilateral right to block the strait, but in reality, the situation is more complex. Iran could destabilize the region using small boats equipped with cruise missiles, deploying underwater mines, or launching armed drones. Just a few small but precise actions could force international shipping companies to halt operations, causing major disruptions in global oil and gas supply chains. Experts warn that if such a scenario unfolds, global oil prices could skyrocket within hours, throwing the world's energy markets into chaos. But what's even more notable is that Iran itself also depends on this route to export its oil. Therefore, an extreme move in Hormuz would essentially be like strangling its own neck. Still, when backed into a corner, should its oil infrastructure come under Israeli attack or its nuclear program face serious setbacks, Iran may reconsider. And Hormuz, once a commercial passageway, could turn into Tehran's final warning to the world. If they cannot develop in peace, then no one else will be allowed peace either. If the Strait of Hormuz is Iran's global warning shot, then a direct strike on US military bases in the region is an even bolder move, a message sent straight to Washington that Iran is ready to enter a confrontation if pushed to the edge. In fact, this has already started to play out even before the ceasefire was officially announced. Earlier this week, a barrage of missiles launched from Iranian territory targeted the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest US military base in the Gulf, located in Qatar. Although the missile defense system successfully intercepted the attack and no casualties were reported, the message was unmistakably clear. Iran is unafraid to damage U.S. strategic interests right within Washington's sphere of influence. The U.S. response came swiftly. The Pentagon ordered the deployment of an additional aircraft carrier strike group, reinforced missile defense systems, and repositioned strategic aircraft, including B-2 stealth bombers, to more distant, secure locations. No one wants a repeat of the harrowing moments at Ain al-Assad base in 2020, when Iranian missiles rained down, sending shockwaves through both U.S. military and political circles. However, military analysts believe that a direct escalation between the U.S. and Iran is still something both sides aim to avoid. Iran understands that a head-on confrontation could spiral beyond control. Therefore, Tehran's likely strategy, if it remains unchanged, will be to strike tactical targets, aiming to wear down resolve and resources, rather than pursuing a full-scale military victory. A war of attrition, a test of America's endurance, not just on the battlefield, but within its own borders, where military decisions constantly face political pressure from both the public and Congress. If direct warfare is a double-edged sword, then proxy forces are the smokescreen that makes it hard for opponents to see where the real strike is coming from. For years, Iran has built a vast network of affiliated armed groups, from Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, to the Houthis in Yemen and Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. These are seen as Tehran's extended arms in unofficial conflicts, allowing Iran to intervene without formally declaring war. And now, as the ceasefire between Iran and Israel grows increasingly fragile, the scenario of a covert escalation through these proxy forces is becoming more and more likely. However, in reality, the strength of these groups is no longer what it once was. Hamas has suffered repeated airstrikes during Israeli military campaigns, forcing many of its military and political leaders to either retreat or be eliminated. Hezbollah, once a formidable deterrent to Israel, has also had to scale back under constant pressure in southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, in Syria, the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, a key strategic ally of Iran, has shaken the logistical and rear-based support structure that Tehran once relied on. What's even more concerning is that despite these setbacks, these forces could resurface in unconventional forms. Isolated attacks, untraceable ambushes, or rocket fire into civilian settlements all can create a prolonged atmosphere of instability. According to expert Edmund Fitton Brown, Iran is gradually reaching the limit of its ability to support these proxy groups, as supply lines are severed and its strategic influence visibly wanes. Yet, once these groups begin acting independently, no longer fully under Tehran's control, the risk of spiraling chaos only grows. When the chess pieces are no longer in the player's hands, the political board of the Middle East may shift in ways no one, not even Iran, can predict. Among the military options Iran is weighing, its ballistic missile arsenal stands out as the most dangerous deterrent, a power that requires no declaration, only a launch. With over 3,000 warheads of various types, Iran possesses the largest ballistic missile stockpile in the Middle East, ranging from short-range rockets to precision-guided medium-range missiles like the Fatah-1, Khorramshahr, and Sejil. These names are not just blueprints on paper. They've already pierced Israeli airspace during large-scale attacks last October, delivering both military and psychological shockwaves. Highly accurate and difficult to intercept, Iran's ballistic missile systems are a threat Israel cannot afford to ignore. Just a few volleys slipping past the Iron Dome defense system could wreak havoc, comparable to a full-scale military invasion. However, experts note that this advantage is beginning to erode. Professor Jan Ver, a Middle East political analyst at the University of Kent, argues that Iran's missile arsenal is far from limitless. A large portion has already been used in recent retaliatory strikes, while Iran's domestic defense industry, crippled by technological sanctions, is struggling to replenish its supply. Not only is the stockpile dwindling, but Iran's missile production and storage facilities have increasingly become prime targets in Israel's precision strikes. Each destroyed factory, each exposed depot, is a deep cut into Tehran's strategic offensive capability. And this leads to a sobering reality. If Iran decides to unleash its ballistic missiles in a full-scale retaliation, it may be sacrificing its last card of deterrence. Because once that power is spent, rebuilding it under siege and in isolation could be nearly impossible. A powerful strike, if it doesn't succeed, might well be the last one they're allowed to make. As military options grow increasingly risky and costly, another strategy, quieter yet no less dangerous, has begun to surface in Tehran's calculations, prolonging negotiations and using the pause to revive its nuclear program. This isn't the first time Iran has played the time card. In the past, they've repeatedly used stalling tactics, dragging talks into dead ends just to buy a few more months of preparation. And now, with a fragile ceasefire in place, that strategic window has opened once again. But this time, Iran holds a new advantage: deep divisions within the U.S. political system. In Washington, the White House, the Pentagon, and the intelligence community are far from unified in how to respond to Tehran. Recent document leaks, along with a lack of transparency around the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, have seriously undermined the Trump administration's ability to make coherent decisions. Iran sees that vulnerability, and it is exploiting it. Instead of confrontation, they choose to lie low. Instead of declarations, they opt for action in the shadows. Each drawn-out negotiation round is not a sign of fatigue. It's an opportunity to rebuild infrastructure, restart reactors, and reinforce what was once destroyed. In a world where every word can be intercepted, Tehran is slowly learning to stay silent, but not still. As the world closely watches every move in the Middle East, another crisis, quieter but no less serious, is simmering right in Washington. After President Donald Trump declared that the strike on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities was a resounding success, a leaked internal report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, painted a starkly different picture. According to the report, the attack only delayed Iran's nuclear program by a few months, far from the total destruction touted to the public. The leak of classified information not only shook the credibility of the White House, but also exposed a troubling reality: a deep rift between the administration and the intelligence community. The FBI promptly launched an investigation, while President Trump accused internal political sabotage of undermining public trust in his leadership. His close advisors dismissed the leak as media exaggeration, but the wave of skepticism had already begun to spread. Several members of Congress, particularly from the Democratic side, expressed outrage at being kept in the dark about the operation. Meanwhile, deep divisions within the Trump administration emerged between those advocating a hardline military stance and others worried about the legality and strategic effectiveness of such actions. This lack of consensus has not only muddled decision-making, but also signaled to the world and adversaries like Iran a glaring weakness. The United States at this moment is no longer a unified front. And with every leaked memo, every redacted report that still finds its way into the press, what's being exposed isn't just a security breach. It's a breach in the very architecture of trust. The more powerful a nation is, the more it needs internal unity. Yet, at this critical juncture, that's precisely what America seems to lack the most. While the world outside continues to debate the ceasefire, within Iran, a quiet reckoning is taking place. Not through the sound of gunfire, but through newspaper pages, editorials, and political messages woven into every word. Iranian state media has called the 12-day confrontation a historic test, not just of military capability, but of political resilience and the endurance of a nation encircled on all sides. Mir News Agency, one of Tehran's key voices, emphasized that war isn't always a failure, so long as the right lessons are learned. And the biggest lesson Iran has openly shared with its people is the distinction between outward appearance and inner strength. In Eastern political culture, according to one article, the true measure lies not in the noise one makes, but in the silent perseverance. What Iran demonstrated wasn't the ability to win in hours, but the capacity to remain standing after sustained blows. Another key theme in Iran's media discourse is the message of unity and internal trust. Major domestic newspapers repeatedly stress the importance of public support, that a government cannot endure without the will of its people, no matter how many weapons it holds. This is not just a domestic political message, but also a signal to the outside world. Iran's power doesn't lie in its missiles, but in the force that has kept it from collapsing: its resolve. In a region defined by turmoil, Iran has chosen to express itself not through loudspeakers, but through its survival after conflict, a message that needs no spokesperson because survival itself is the declaration. 12 days of conflict have come to a close, with what's being called a historic ceasefire. But history, as we've seen, isn't written solely through signed agreements. It's shaped just as much by what unfolds afterward. As the smoke clears, the real questions begin to surface. Is this truly peace, or merely a pause before the next storm? And if peace is sustained only by military deterrence, can it ever last long enough to become real? While world powers continue to jostle for influence, the deeper question falls to the nations within the region themselves. Will they be mere spectators, or the architects of their own future? The Middle East cannot simply wait for peace to be handed down by distant hands. The region's destiny will be shaped by its own choices, by each nation's unity or division. No one wants war, but not everyone has the courage to preserve true peace. And perhaps the most important lesson after those 12 tense days is this. In a world of constant upheaval, peace doesn't arrive from the outside. It begins only when each country in the region chooses a path different from the past. In the end, what matters most isn't who was right or wrong, but whether we are wise enough to turn the silence after war into an opportunity for a future free of gunfire.